So it turns out there's a big disparity between the quality and quantity of top marathoners in Japan and the United States. So I thought I'd take a deeper look as to why that is, and I think some of the reasons might surprise you. Well, hello, welcome to Running Otaku. I am the Running Otaku, and today we're going to talk about the big disparity between Japanese and American marathon running. Now, if you are an American high school runner, I think you will find this video really interesting. Okay, so the first thing is, how great is the disparity? Well, let's take a look. So in 2018, these were all of the sub 212 marathoners in the world. As you can imagine, Kenya had the most, 49% of them, or 138 total. Next was Ethiopia, again, not a surprise, 63, so 22% of the total. Third, some of you may not know this, but Japan is a huge marathoning country. So there were 31 Japanese marathoners who all ran under 212 last year. And for America, one, Galen Rupp, right? And the rest of the world, there were 48 or 17%. So you can see it's, what is it here? 31 versus 1 in terms of sub 212 marathoners. Okay, let's spend a minute or so talking about Japan. So this is Japan. You can see here there are 47 what are called prefectures, so Fukushima, Niigata, Nagano, etc. So the country split into 47 parts, essentially states, and this is important when I get into the high school competition. Now, just in terms of comparison, Japan is roughly the same size as California, and again, the 47 prefectures, but the population is much larger. So there's 127 million people in Japan, so that means it's 3 times more populous than California. But in terms of Japan versus the United States, then the situation is reversed. In the US, I think there's about 350 million people, so almost triple the number of those in Japan. Now, in terms of school, the schooling is not that different than the United States. There's elementary school that goes through 6th grade, and then junior high is 7th, 8th, and 9th grade in Japan. And then high school is just 3 years, which is 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. And there's both public and private schools. They go to school 5 days a week and about half a day on Saturday. So in the US, I think we have around 180 school days a year. In Japan, that number is closer to 250. So some of you may have heard about the Ekiden in Japan. And the Ekiden is just simply a relay marathon. They don't carry a baton, they wear a sash, and when they hand off to the next runner, they hand the sash off, and the next runner puts it on. And there are varying distances and for varying age groups. So they actually start in junior high. So there's a junior high, national Ekiden. There's high school, college, and pros, and even, an age group. Now, the reason why I bring this up is the most famous of which is really important. It's called the Hakone Ekiden, and it's a 2-day event. It goes from Tokyo to the kind of resort town of Hakone. So it's an out and back. So the first day is 108 kilometers from Tokyo to Hakone. And then the second day is 110 kilometers back. Now, it's a college race, and the top 23 universities get to participate, and they each have 10 runners. So 5 runners on the first day, 5 runners on the second day. And what's interesting is starting in 1987, this event was live broadcast. Now, it takes about 11 hours, and it's totally uninterrupted coverage. So people are watching this event over the course of 2 days. It's maybe analogous to a big cricket match in England. And the TV rating here, now this is important. So it gets about 28% of all Japanese households actually watch this event. Now, I'm sure they don't watch all 11 hours, but they watch a big part. For comparison, the biggest TV show in the US live show is the Super Bowl, which gets a 41% rating. So not quite as popular as the Super Bowl, but pretty darn close. And it's become a New Year's tradition. So this Hakone Ekiden takes place every year on January 2nd and 3rd. And it's just a family tradition. A lot of families will watch the event, similar to how maybe many families will watch not only the Super Bowl, but the Thanksgiving Day games as well. Now, there's a high school national ekiden, and the way it works is each prefecture gets one team. So that means there's a total of 47 teams, and it's a much shorter event. It's a one-day event, and as you can see here, it's exactly a marathon in distance. So, 42 kilometers or 26 miles. And it's split into 7 legs, and they all vary between short of 3K and as long as 10K. So you can see here, leg 1 is 10K, leg 2 is 3K, a couple of 8K legs, a 3K, a 5, and 2 5Ks. So this is important because Japanese do have cross country, but it's this national high school ekiden which is really the focus. So the teams are really preparing for this. So they had to prepare some of their runners for 8 and 10K and some for 3 and 5K. So in general, the team is training together, and so they're training for distances that in many instances are far longer than the 5K that US kids are training for in high school. So the performances of these high school kids in this ekiden are truly phenomenal, and I'll get into that in just a minute. But to give you an idea, the 10K guys are coming through in 29 minutes. The 8K guys are doing 23 minutes. There's a downhill 8K, and some of them are doing it as fast as the high 22s. So truly phenomenal performances. And the question that came to mind is, how are the Japanese high school runners so good? And how does it work its way to what we see the professionals doing? And so I wanted to take a look at the high school training, and this is hard to do. The coaches there are just as cagey as the coaches here in the US. They don't give too many details. Now, I found one of the top high school teams, the coach just said, we run at least 20 kilometers a day. So that means they're running at least 12 miles a day times 7 days a week. So they're doing at least 85 miles a week, right? And I think in the US, most high school kids are probably running 40 miles a week or maybe even fewer than that. I found a coach who has retired about a decade ago, but in the 1990s, he was coaching a high school team in Gifu that made the high school national ekiden many times. I think finished as high as 3rd one year. And he wrote a long paper about the training. And so I'm using that as the basis for this discussion. What he said was really interesting. So in Japan, they use the metric system. So everything's based on kilometers. And his idea was basically he wanted to get his runners to be able to race at 3 kilometers per minute, which is equivalent to about 4 minutes and 50 seconds per mile. So that means this. For grades 7 to 9, he wanted his kids that are focused on 3K mostly to be able to run a 3K in 9 minutes. Now, this isn't the whole team, but it's just the upper echelon of the team. So that means that by high school, where the main track event isn't the mile, like it is here in the US, it's the 5,000 meters. So he wants his kids to be able to run that 5K in 15 minutes. In college, they're focused a lot on the half marathon and 10K distance. So that means for them, he wants the runners to be able to run at least a 30-minute 10K or a half marathon in 1:03:18, right? This is starting to get pretty serious. And then for the pros, if they're to keep that same pace of 3 minutes per kilometer, it equates to a 2:06:35 marathon. So I don't think this coach is by any means unique. I think a lot of coaches had the same philosophy and the same goals. So here's a question for you. How many Japanese high schoolers do you think can run a sub 15 5-minute 10K? And this is on the track. 20, 30, 50? Turns out over 500 per year can go sub 15 in a 5K. So sub 15 5K is pretty impressive. Question is, how are they doing this? Well, it turns out that the training philosophy, I don't think is that different than the philosophies we use here in the United States. It's just that they're doing a lot more mileage, I think. So this one coach, he basically broke down his workouts into 5 different paces, depending on the length of the interval or the run for the day. So at the fastest, well, first, this pacing chart is basically for his better high school runners that can do essentially a 15-minute 5K or pretty close to a 30-minute 10K. Some of his guys are coming through at sub 30 for the 10K. So he's really basing everything off the race pace, which is 3 minutes per kilometer or 30-minute 10K. So that means for the striders, where they're just doing 100-meter sprints, they're running faster than 10K pace, so 230 to 250. So as you can see here, that's equivalent to 4 to 430 per mile. And then speed workout, where they're doing intervals of here, as you can see, between 1 and maybe 3 kilometers. So half a mile to a little more than a mile and a half. That's just faster than 10K race pace, so 250 to 3, or 430 to 450 per mile for those kind of intervals. And then for the speed endurance, which at a low end here is a 1K all the way up to, looks like 10K. I think that's for college, but for high school, it's probably a little bit less than 10K distance, because that would be a 10K race. But anyways, running at 10K, race pace for those kind of longer speed endurance runs. And then for fast endurance, which is probably something equivalent to, lactate threshold or so, they're running these kind of from between 8K, which is 5 miles, to 16K, which is 10 miles. And I have 3 minutes here. I'm sure it's probably slower. I think it's actually starting at 3:20. But anyways, you can see they're running these kind of pretty long distances at quite a fast pace. And then the endurance and recovery runs are quite slow. So 4:40 to 5 minutes per kilometer, or 7:30 to 8 minutes per mile. So their endurance recovery runs are run at an easy pace, quite easy, if you're a sub 30 10K guy. So he also provided a little bit of how he schedules his workouts. And this is a kind of I guess it's a 9-day segment here, where you can see a couple of easy days followed by a couple of hard days, with an easy day, a couple hard days, and this kind of pattern here. And I don't have too many details he didn't provide. I assume that almost every day they're doing doubles, so I would think that they're probably also doing at least 12 miles a day here as well. But let's look at the kind of the harder runs. So the first one came on Wednesday. It's a 16K, which again is 10 miles, endurance run at 3:30 to 3:20 per kilometer. So this is about 10% or so slower than their 10K race pace. And he said something interesting. He said some of his rival coaches are actually having his high school kids do longer runs at 25K, which is 15 miles. But he didn't want to go that far. So what he did was he shortened it, but increased the intensity. So a little bit shorter, but a little bit faster. And then, oops, I skipped this, sorry. On Tuesday, the speed endurance day. So amongst everything else, there was a 4K tempo run and a 2K tempo run. And then on Friday, the speed endurance and endurance day, a 12K, so that's about 8 miles ish, at 3:20 to 3:15 per kilometer. So that is maybe 5-7% slower than 10K race pace, and then culminating in 1K, running up a hill, or running kind of a faster pace to get the leg turnover even faster. And then on Saturday, it's what they call the cross-country run. So a hilly 16K build-up on the dirt trails. And this is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, the kind of myth is that Japanese are doing heavy miles, and well, they are kind of doing heavy miles, but they're doing it all on the street, and that's not the case. One of the important concepts here is this notion of community and group. And I think it's really important. And Japan in general is a quite collective society where there's a strong pressure to conform, and it leads to a very kind of harmonious society. But there is intense pressure to not stick out. And in fact, unfortunately, it's one of the causes for the very high suicide rate in the country. But on the positive side, there is a strong sense of belonging. So for instance, on these build-up runs, one of the reasons he does it is so that the whole team can run together, for the first 5 or 10K. And this fosters a real sense of teamwork. It gets the slower, younger kids to be able to run with the elite guys on their team. And it gives them a feeling of pride and a feeling of belonging and something to aspire to. And it's really important for this kind of team collective because they're training really hard together, and in isolation that can be difficult, but as part of a team it becomes much easier. And in fact, the whole notion of the ekiden actually furthers this team concept because not one runner can get all the way to the finish line and win. It takes the whole team as a relay, and while it's only one guy who ultimately crosses the finish line, it's well understood that he could have never gotten there in the first place if it weren't for his teammates. So the training isn't that different than what we see in the United States, at least in terms of the concept of doing long runs and tempo runs and intervals. It's just that they're doing, in this case, 4 hard workouts a week and a lot of doubles. And whereas the American high schooler is probably averaging 40 miles, the Japanese high schooler is more than doubling that amount. So what I wanted to do was see what the effect of this hard training was in terms of performances. And so what I did was, well, it's really hard to compare Japanese to American high school runners because the events are different. Like I said, in track, the focus is on the 5K. In Japan, and in the fall, winter, it's not so much on cross country, although they do run it. It's this multi-distance, ekiden event. So here's what I did. I took a look at the top American performers in cross country by looking at the runners at the Nike Cross Nationals, which is a 5K cross country, national team championship here in the US. And what I did was I took a look at some of the high schools competing in the national ekiden in Japan and took that year's best times when they ran on the track in the 5K. So it's a bit of apples to oranges because I'm comparing cross-country 5K to a track 5K in Japan, but you'll see what I did to try and even things out. Anyways, in 2018, the top 7 NXN finishers were right here from 14:57 to 15:10. And then in Japan, again, there's 47 prefectures, so 47 teams. I took a look at 5 of them. The first one was the team from Nagano, which actually won the race. And these are their top 7 runners, what they did on the track for a 5K. And then if you look at Okayama, you can see here their top 7. And this asterisk means that this particular runner was a exchange student, in this case from Kenya. Some of the top teams do have one African runner. They stay all 3 years. They're a regular student. They speak Japanese. And this one was quite fast at 13:36 for a 5K in high school. And then we have Oita, and they also had a Kenyan who coincidentally also ran the mind-blowing 13:36 time in high school. Fukushima, these are their top 7, and Hiroshima, who finished 20th, as you can see here in the ekiden. But anyways, these are their top 7 runners. So what I did was I imagined that there were 5 dual meets, the top 7 NXN runners against each of these 5 high school teams in Japan one by one, and scored it based on times if it were a cross-country race. And as you can see here across the board, the NX team gets swept by all 5 of these. Even the team here that finished 20th still sweeps the top 7. Now again, this is not a fair comparison. NXN is on a pretty hilly course. This year actually the rain wasn't too bad, the footing was good, but definitely slower than the track. So here's what I did. I gave the NXN kids a handicap of 10 seconds per mile or 30 seconds overall because they're not running on the track. When I did that, these are their new times, so they've all been reduced by 30 seconds. Rescored these 5 kind of imaginary dual meets, and they still lose to the first place Nagano, almost swept, 49-15. To Okayama, a little bit closer, but still lose. Oita, they actually won, so congratulations. 12th place Fukushima, they lose, and to 20th place Hiroshima, they win. So good job there. So there's a handicap. I wanted to go a little bit further because maybe 10 seconds per mile wasn't enough of a handicap. I figure at the extreme, 15 seconds per mile should more than compensate for this hilly cross-country course. And so I reran the numbers, and now each of these is now 45 seconds faster than their actual time. And they still lose to Nagano 34-21. They beat Okayama, the second place team. They beat the fourth place team. They actually still lose to the 12th place team, but they do beat Hiroshima as well. So even with this 45-second handicap or 15-second per mile, they're still losing. And these aren't prefectural all-star teams. This is just one high school team and their top runners. Actually, if you took the top 7 performers from these various Japanese high school teams and compared them to the top 7 NXNs with that 15-second per mile handicap, you can see the slowest Japanese runner would be 14:12, which is the same as the fastest American guy. So pretty amazing stuff. Okay, so another way to get a bit more apples to apples comparison would be to look at the 5,000 meters on the track for the high school runners in the US and Japan. In Japan, that's easy. Again, it's one of those magical distances. In the US, it's very infrequently run. I mean, most meets only go up to 2 miles. There are a few invitationals that go higher, so we can take a look because there have been some American greats who have done the 5K on the track in high school. So, excuse me, I split the runners up into 3 categories. So for the Japanese runners, there's the Japanese runners, and then there are the Kenyans or other Africans, exchange students that are competing in the high schools there, and then the US runners. So if I look at just the top 10 5,000 meters on the track performances for each of these 3 segments, here's what we get. All 10 of the fastest are the African exchange students in Japan. And these guys are amazing. I mean, there's some great runners in this 10. For example, Samuel Wanjiru, who won the gold medal at the 2008 Beijing Marathon, is part of this. So you can see the type of caliber runners that actually come to Japan to compete in high school. Now, we have 3 Americans here. We've got Galen Rupp, 13:37. This is incredible for high school. Go back to 64, we've got Lindgren and then Ritz in 01. Those 2 ran 13:44. So these are amazing performances. So there's 3 Americans there, but the next 10 are all Japanese. And then the last 7 are the Americans. And there's some of note here, like Pri in high school ran 13:52, but in fact, he would not have cracked the top 10 in Japan, all time at least. And you can see some of these other runners here. In fact, the Japanese are so deep that I tried to see how many Japanese runners can fit in a broken 14 minutes. 73 of them. So that means that Pri would have just barely edged out the number 73 all-time Japanese guy. It's really fascinating. So I thought maybe this isn't a fair fight. What if I compared this school, Saku Chosei, which is a school in Nagano, Japan, to the top 5 US NCAA Division 1 teams that just competed in cross-country championships not too long ago. I took the top 6 instead of top 7 because some of those college teams, I could only find the 5K PRs for the top 6 of them. But anyways, the Japanese team, the top 6 ranged from 13:47 to a lowly 14:23. And this is just 1 year. It's not all-time grades, but just 1 year. So the average was 14 minutes, 9 seconds for the 5K. And then if we go to the top 5 teams, which is NAU, Northern Arizona University, BYU, University of Portland, Stanford, and Colorado, you can see they all beat the Japanese high school, but not by a whole lot here. In BYU, they're a little bit older too. They get to serve a 2-year mission. So what I did was I saw the year they graduated from high school and assumed they were 18 at the time, and then added an appropriate number of years. So they're a little bit older here. So they all beat the Japanese high school team, but not by a whole lot. In fact, I think there was one famous year where the winning NCAA team was Syracuse, and their top guys, the 5K times, were actually on average slower than the winning Japanese high school that year. So you can see here that pretty even. I did look at some of the top Japanese college teams. Aoyama University in Tokyo is one of them. Their top 6 guys averaged 13:49. So pretty much parity here. So things start leveling up in terms of the top guys. But in terms of breadth, it's still, or depth, it's still quite a distance. So the 10th guy on Aoyama was 13:58. and I could go 15, 20 deep, and they're all really, really strong. So at the upper echelon in college, it evens out a little bit, but the depth is still incredible on the Japanese side. So with the high schoolers training this hard, the obvious question is, do they burn out? And so I wanted to take a look at that by seeing how, what the depth looks like at the college level. Because if they're burning out in high school, then in college they shouldn't have too many great runners. So if we look at the NCAA Division I runners, there are none who went under 28 in the 10K last year. There were 18 guys in Division I who went sub 29, and there were 65 that went 29:30. So let's look at the Japanese top universities. There were 7 who ran sub 28. Now, admittedly, 5 of these 7 were the Kenyan exchange students, but still, they're training in the Japanese system, so I'm including them here. In terms of sub 29, there were 29, so you're starting to see a little distance here, but still, these kind of upper echelon guys are not too different. And then we get to the next tier, the sub 29:30 guys, and while there were 65 in the US, the NC2A, there were 245 in Japan. So if these high school kids in Japan are running crazy miles, doesn't look like they're burning out, because there's a ton of great Japanese college runners as well. And then if we go beyond and kind of look at the pros, as you saw for sub 212, it's not even close. If we go to that kind of next level to get a little bit of depth, sub 215 marathoners in 2018, there were 25 Americans who beat that. Now, I couldn't even find a list that went as high as 215 in Japan. There are just too many runners. But here's what I did find. In college, now this is just college, but there were 366 Japanese collegiates that went sub 205 for the half, right? So I'm pretty sure most, if not all, of those guys could go sub 215. And again, this is just college. There's a pro system in Japan where they have corporate teams, and there's roughly 500 or so Japanese professional runners that are part of these corporate teams that take care of their salaries and all their living expenses, etc. So the number would grow quite substantially. And so there you go. There is a huge disparity in the depth of number of runners, and that starts, I showed you high school, but it actually starts all the way back in junior high in Japan. And ultimately, there's many reasons why the Japanese are outperforming the US in terms of marathoning. But I want to focus really on 3 reasons. The first of which is that huge pipeline of runners starting way back in high school. And you can see how many of them are really running at that kind of 3-minute per kilometer pace, at 450 pace. The 500 or so who are running sub 15 already for the 5K. We just don't have anywhere near those kinds of numbers here in the United States. Now, burnout doesn't seem to be a factor, but there's something else to keep in mind, and that's happiness, right? I was a high school runner. I did track and cross country, and those are some of my fondest memories. A lot of hijinks and a lot of good times during those years in high school. Now, I think the question becomes for many of us, which would you rather have? A really great, fun high school experience, or maybe something that wasn't that much fun, but you really got the most out of yourself and a lot of personal satisfaction? And for each of us, the answer is going to be different. But at least for the Japanese runners, a lot of them are willing to forego this kind of happiness in exchange for personal growth and being part of a great team. Now, the second factor, as I mentioned, I think is the Ekiden, and specifically that Hakone Ekiden, which is, again, kind of like their Super Bowl. I think that truly inspires young kids, high schoolers, collegiate athletes to really train. So while they're doing doubles and they're doing 80-mile plus weeks, instead of burning out, they're still inspired by trying to make that event. And I think that has a very important role in kind of pulling those kids through the system and allowing them to train at such high levels. The third factor, I think, has to do with this collective and being part of a group, right? I mentioned the kind of cultural differences between Japan and the US with this respect, but I think it's really important because if you're gonna train so hard for so long, it's almost impossible to do it on your own. In the US, the pros do have these usually shoe sponsor teams, and there could be 5 or 6 or 7 guys on a team training together. But even that, they're training for different distances, and they could be split off into different groups within the club. In Japan, that's just not the case, right? There's several dozen professional, both men's and women's teams that are all sponsored by corporations. And they're giving the athletes salaries and everything they need so they can focus 100% of their energy and attention to running, and specifically to running these Ekiden races and the marathon. This video raises a lot of issues, and I'm really curious to hear what you guys think. Would you have sacrificed all the fun you had in high school for some of the hard training you've seen here in order to run much, much faster? You know, let me know what you think about this or anything else in the video in the comments below. Okay, so there you have it. I really hope you enjoyed today's video. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and click the like button. If you really liked what you saw, then please hit subscribe and that little bell right next to it, click that as well. That way you'll be instantly notified every time I upload a new video. And so that's it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope to see you all next time. Bye-bye.